This is episode number 95, featuring Susan Nicholas Gephardt.
This is the PleinAir podcast with Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of PleinAir magazine. In the PleinAir podcast, we cover the world of outdoor painting. Called PleinAir, the French coined the term, which means open air or outdoors. The French pronounce it PleinAir. Others say PleinAir. No matter how you say it, there is a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is about that movement. Now, here's your host, author, publisher, and painter, Eric Rhodes.
Thank you, Jim Kipping. This podcast is brought to you by the PleinAir Salon, the bi-monthly art competition with $27,000 in annual cash prizes. That's a big distinction. Everybody says, big numbers, but they're not cash. This is cash. $27,000 in annual cash prizes, including $15,000 for the grand prize winner, and you also get the cover of PleinAir magazine. There are bi-monthly winners and many categories. There's like 20 categories, so if you win in a category, you are entered into the judging, and you're also being seen by all these really famous judges and by gallery owners and people like that. So, and you get a feature in the PleinAir Today newsletter. So check it out at pleinairsalon.com. The interview is also underwritten by the PleinAir Convention, the world's largest PleinAir event. It's quite an event. It's pretty darned exciting. We had no idea it was going to become this successful, but we're very thankful for it. Last year we had a big group of people. This year we're going to San Francisco, and we're like already 45% sold out, and it's not even close to April. San Francisco and wine country. San Francisco's been the most requested place we've ever had. Everybody's always said, I want to go and paint in San Francisco. And so we've got all these really cool places. It's completely safe. It's beautiful. Lined up. Going to paint the Golden Gate Bridge. Going to paint some other iconic places. There's also a lot of scenery around there. There's crashing waves in the ocean. There's beautiful rolling hills nearby. I mean, there's a lot to paint. And I used to live out there, so I know all the great paint spots, and I'm going to take you to them. We're also going to go up to wine country and paint, and it's coming up in April. So we're going to have a lot of fun. There's about 80 instructors total. Not all of them are signed up yet, but we'll tell you who they are as they come along. But we've got some big ones, including Joe Zabukvik, who is the amazing watercolor artist from Australia, considered to be the best watercolor artist in the world. We've got Joe McGurl, who's one of the great oil painters. And they both are going to do pre-convention workshops, which are optional, but they also are going to be doing the main thing. And of course, we've got just some outstanding painters coming in. One that I'm really excited about is Mark D'Alessio from Florence, Italy. Classically trained, one of the best PleinAir painters I've ever seen. So you want to make sure that you come to the PleinAir Convention. You can learn more at pleinairconvention.com. And coming up after the interview, I'm going to be answering some art marketing questions in the Marketing Minute. So first, let's get right to the interview with Susan Nicholas Gephardt. Well, Susan, welcome to the PleinAir podcast.
And thank you. It's quite an honor to be here. I've looked forward to it. And,
quite an honor. Come on.
Yes, I know. You're my friend, which is, we've done a lot of things together, a lot of painting, for sure.
Where did you and I first meet? Was it at the Adirondack event?
No, it was my first PleinAir convention in Monterey in 2014.
Wow, you have a good memory.
It totally changed my whole thought process of what could be. And
well, I wasn't expecting that, but I'm going to ride with that. What the heck are you talking about?
Oh, that's what I remember.
Yeah. What do you mean it changed your whole process of what you could be? What's that mean?
Well, I was relatively sheltered, living where I do in central Pennsylvania. And I raised a family of 3 children, married for 30 years, and then I was caregiver to my father. And those things kind of put constraints on a girl that was very young, like in her teens, that dreamed of being a painter but didn't know what it meant.
Yeah.
So, that nutshell of who you are is part of who I am and where I am now.
Yeah. So, but what's the PleinAir convention got to do with that?
My attendance there opened my mind to connections beyond my imagination. It was the landscape, first of all. When you're on the eastern coast, you have no idea what it means to be in a forest and then in the ocean in a few minutes. That does not equate.
Yeah.
So the landscape was, for me, shockingly spellbinding to a point where it just made me smile. And then at the convention, being able to rub shoulders with all these people that had the same dreams and aspirations that I did. Where I live, I don't have that, but on a very limited connection.
So would you say that, because I don't really remember knowing the status of your career at that time because we just met at that time, but would you say that it exposed you to what other people were doing that kind of gave you some ideas of where to go in your career, or was your career already pretty well established?
Well, I would say that I was soundly established, but naive in the area of current social media marketing.
Yeah.
And I had done a limited amount of advertising in magazines, but at the convention I was already thinking that was something that I'd like to do. So indeed, I met staff within your ad marketing that was really patient, connecting, and they listened and they helped me make decisions that fit what I was ready to do. Because we're not always ready right at the edge. But that was my turning point where I thought my career was on the high dive and I was about to take some really choice thought risks that were based on things that I'd learned over 40 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, makes sense. Makes total sense.
Yeah.
And I apologize to everybody listening.
I
didn't intend to go down this road, and I don't want this to become about the convention. But I was just, you said that, and I had to probe it. I had to wonder.
And it did, because where I live is just this really lovely central Pennsylvania community, Victorian towns connected to Penn State University, farms and fields and rolling mountains and creeks, and we're probably 2 hours from Pittsburgh, 4 hours from Philadelphia, and I grew up outside of Philadelphia. And when I went to Penn State, what I knew was even more sheltered than where I am now.
Well, your career has really soared, though, in the last few years. You have become, I think, and I don't want to misrepresent this, and if I do, just slap my hand, but I think that you've become more nationally known than you had been, that you were more of a regional or locally known artist, very successful, and you're right, but something changed, and then you really started getting more national attention, galleries around the country and so on. Is that correct?
Yes. And that backs what I said, that the convention changed my life, because I finally connected with people that could help me be the arms and legs of what I dreamed. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So I'm kind of curious. I think you have a really interesting story. I know about it because you and I have spent a lot of time together over the past few years at various events. And I like you very much. You're a very likable person. But in spite of that, I'm going to ask you to tell your story, because your dad was an artist, and there was some connectivity to what you were trying to do to honor your dad that is kind of what's driving this bus. Talk to me about that.
Okay. Well, the dynamics of the growth of an artist, wherever they start, and mine started very, very young. My father wanted to be an artist, but he was raising a family, 6 children. I had 5 brothers, 2 older, 3 younger, and he didn't get a chance to really do what he wanted to do. But I saw lovely drawings, figurative drawings. There was one large painting in our living room that I grew up with, pond, woods, kind of a canoe in the water, and I just, that was huge, hanging over our sofa, and I never saw him paint. Not until he retired. And of course, I already had my degree. And he'd always been that person that encouraged me, that you're doing what I would have loved to have done. And, what he wanted was that he wanted me to take the risk he never took, I would say, because he worked for Philadelphia Electric Company for 40-some years. But when he retired, he became an artist because within him was that drive to want to paint, and his eye was always looking. And he had such a great sense of humor. I remember when I was about 10 years old, I asked him to draw a picture of a black-eyed Susan flower. And what he drew, he wouldn't let me see in pencil. And within 5 minutes, he had drawn a little sketch of me and my face with a black eye, because I was always getting kind of banged around playing football or whatever with my brothers. He just had a great, great sense of humor, and it just always surprised me. So he was a driving force of encouragement, encouraged me to go to college, encouraged me through high school at a young age. I don't know, does that answer kind of what you're asking? Yeah.
So did he ever take his art further than other than a hobbyist?
Oh, he did. And I would say that just a simple gift to someone that has retired and decided they're going to pursue art can make all the changes, because he got some pastels and an easel, and within a handful of years, his eye had been so subliminally trained. He was doing paintings that were selling, being shown in exhibits. Locally, we were doing father and daughter shows. And eventually, we had one in 2007 that was a father and daughter retrospective. And we had 60-some paintings in it at the Southern Alleghenies Museum.
Cool.
Which is just such a huge honor. And he was very humble.
So he
was
actually,
until he was 80 years old.
he actually lived his dream then. He became the artist. He was actually selling artwork and doing shows.
Absolutely. He was. We had shows together, Pastel Society of Central Pennsylvania, and many other shows. But I think the key point for me is the connectiveness to having someone that mentors you, encourages you, because I often hear stories of artists that had family members that said, no, you can't pursue art because it won't give you a living. And for my father and my mother and my whole family, they didn't worry about that. It was more about your heart and your dreams and your inspiration.
So you had told me at one point that you had dedicated some part of your career to your dad, in honor of your dad. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, in 2007, I had my website designed by a dear friend's daughter who they had collected my work for years. As a matter of fact, I think there was a little Fine Art Today or PleinAir Today newsletter that incorporated a story about these collectors. And the daughter created this beautiful website for me, and when I decided on a name for it, I wanted to honor my father. And so, I have a very long name, Susan Nicholas Gephardt, and I decided to focus on the S because when I was in high school, I would do S. Nick, N-I-C, and it's a very long name, Nicholas, N-I-C-H-O-L-A-S, but I cut off the beginning part of my last name and just put Art in there, S. Nicholas Art, in honor of my father, who was Thomas Nicholas Jr. And it's just, you'd have to do things for reasons, and mine was based on my name is too big, it's bigger than I am, and who can I honor?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't bring this up, but I will, because that's just the kind of guy I am. But, you and I have had a lot of marketing discussions, and you've had some questions about whether or not you should expand or change or shorten your name in terms of how you're known. Obviously, you've become known as Susan Nicholas Gephardt. You and I had a discussion about, well, should you, shouldn't you? I don't remember what the ultimate outcome was, but he's obviously stuck with it. So do you want to talk about that? Do you want to be so bold as to kind of let people in on what you were thinking?
Well, yes. I think...
Talk about putting you on the spot.
I have to go back to the essence of who I am. If I was a teenager signing my name S. SNIC, like SNIC. I am now signing S. Nicholas because it's about the painting, and I'm thoughtfully looking at all these different connected things in the world and social media and the connectiveness of the computer and internet. I think that I can sign my painting however I want, and Nicholas is the name that I want to use.
Yeah, and I assume Gephardt is a married name.
It is, but the last part of it is ART, art. So I was totally unconscious when I made that original website and email. I mean, it seems silly, but today it's important because names get very discombobulated out there. And you talk about branding in your marketing boot camp. I've been studying marketing since the mid-'80s before people even knew what it was. And it's been baby steps all the way. It has.
So let's talk about art.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious, how would you describe what it is you do?
Well, I have a passion to the environment in that it's deeply influenced me because of where I grew up. I grew up where I could walk into the woods by a creek. My family traveled a lot. We saw the coastline of the east and up into Canada, down to Florida. So I had those visual stimulations. We had a fifth wheel camper, and my parents would put us in the back with a deck of cards in the overhang so we could watch where we were going. But we were just having a wonderful, relaxing time as they journeyed to where they were going. So my art is much about the beauty of the environment, how I can share the stewardship of caring for it, perhaps, in a subliminal way. But the essence of what I paint is my love of color and atmosphere, mark making. I love all mediums. I'm especially connected to oils and the mixing of colors, but the spontaneity of pastels, just grabbing it like out of a candy store of a box, the visual intensity of the colors is so thrilling and totally immersing. Anyone that gets a brand new box of pastels without wrappers on them, they're just blown away by the color. And I can connect that to oils.
You have your own line of pastels now, don't you?
I do. I just had this wonderful relationship with Jack Richardson and Company probably since 2007. Shortly after I got my website, I was contacted by them to try products. So this has been an ongoing collaboration, and through time, they've supported me in many different elements. And most recently, they just did a line of 80 set Earth, Water, Sky under my signature S. Nicholas.
You know, they're a very caring company. They are.
I love them.
They're very involved in the community of arts. They have a gallery at their location, which I've heard about. I've never seen, and they put their money where their mouth is. They're not just taking from the market; they're putting back to the market. So that's pretty cool.
They are.
Yeah.
Everyone that I work with. So they were the first people that contacted me, and then the next through my website was Gamblin, who also are very, very connected to their people. And I feel as though I had this mentoring of art products that nurtured my skills as I was growing. Back in the 80s, my further education after my Bachelor of Fine Arts from Penn State University, that went on because I'd had an associate from a small college outside of Philadelphia. And that college was where there was a barn in a field that they had totally turned into the Montgomery County Community College. And it was one of the top 10 colleges. But the art studio was in a barn. And that immersed me into my first experience of plein air painting. I'm kind of backtracking here through the art products because my interest really is rooted in outdoor painting, and then my education, making the choice to do that, being supported through what I loved while I was a teen, doing watercolor, botanicals, and through high school doing murals on the walls and being asked to do my end covers in our yearbook. So I had validations, and I knew I wanted to go on to college. and the teacher that most influenced me in my first year of school, being very shy. I was commuting to school.
You're not shy anymore.
You don't think so?
No, not for a second. No, it's all an act. I know.
Well, I was absolutely petrified to talk in front of people, believe me. So it's a long journey to come from. I'm trying to paint a picture of someone that was, let's say, growing up with brothers that not necessarily let her have her voice, but parents that encouraged her, and it was a very slow, methodical process. I had hard things that happened, loss and grief, and a deep interest in psychology. So who I am now is all connected to the things that happened to me at a young age, and I think it makes me be a better teacher. And the art that I dream to make is the essence is from the landscape, deals with color, but I would say it's impressionistic. I'm more of a form person than a linear one.
What's
My father
that mean?
would tease me. Well, my dad loved doing architecture, and there's a 5-story grist mill nearby, the Gamble Mill, that he would always say to me as he's working on these complex angles, and there's many of them around here. There's a lot of old historical buildings. He'd say, "You need to take a closer look at perspective. You should sit down with me sometime, and I'll show you." But we would paint together, and I was more of a form and color person. And through time, I realized how important value and line is. The evolution of the artist.
So
kind of going in a circle here, Eric.
Yeah, I get that. Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting about you, I was watching you paint when you were up here in the Adirondacks, and you use your paintings feel incredibly colorful, but they don't feel inappropriately garish. The tendency when people want to use a lot of color is to misuse color. How do you do that? How do you pull that off? Making something feel colorful but feeling appropriate, feeling tasteful, because that's really a trick. It's not easy to do.
Well, that's actually a really great question, and something that I've thought about a lot. And the first word as you were speaking there, I thought of was harmony. And seeing harmony side by side, which I do, I usually set up my palette within a circle on my palette rather than pulling it down. And I think about how the colors look on the palette before I even begin to paint. It's a dual purpose method of finding harmony with rich color. I also carefully use a palette knife and not a brush to mix. And I wipe my palette knife before I touch the paint so I'm not contaminating the paint that I'm mixing into. And I striate my colors rather than mixing them like a batter.
Say that
so
again.
I have a lot of variety of
you
colors.
Do what?
When I take my palette knife and I mix two colors, rather than mixing it like batter, like cooking batter, I striate it so that there's threads of the other color through it.
Right.
And I'm looking down into that paint, and I can immediately see the variations of harmony between those two colors.
Somebody once told me if you're creating a 3-color mix, most people's tendency is to put all 3 colors together and mix them together, but you'll actually get more effective mixing if you mix A and B together and then mix into C.
Yeah, I think maybe subconsciously that's what I'm doing. That's another way of saying it. But I create these areas of color from the original colors. And in answer to your question, how do I keep that clean color that is harmonious, I'm going to say, rather than garish? And that's what it is. And that's, sometimes I'll take risks and I'll try a color, and I often can see it immediately on the palette, like, ooh, that's not there. That's not right. And rather than putting it on the painting, however, if I'm doing a demonstration, I'm working very quickly, I may accidentally grab some of that color and put it on there, and then the students will get to witness me saying, ooh, that's not the right color.
So why
You know,
not just
it's a gut feeling.
mix your color with your brush instead of your palette knife?
Well, I do on the canvas, but on the palette, I like to use 3 or 4 brushes. I designate them so that I'm not using a single brush and washing out. I have a really clean method that I teach my students so that they don't have to use a lot of rags. They don't get any paint on themselves.
Well, that's
And
no fun.
they're using it. Well, it is if you want to be healthy and you don't want to wear rubber gloves. I don't know how you do that. It's so hard.
Yeah, I wear
It's
rubber
sweaty
gloves.
and hot. However, when I'm doing pastels, I'll put little finger cuts on when the 3 fingers that I'm holding the pastel, because I think that gives you an opportunity to really get into it, because pastels are real hands-on.
Yeah.
And for me, those 2 mediums really communicate to each other. I teach the idea of the color theory within the 2 mediums of oil and pastel, that there's a crossover. One is a lot of mixing, but the other is overlaying. But it's kind of interesting if you look at and compare some of my oils and my pastels, you almost have to do a double take.
That's right.
Before you can really figure out which is an oil and which is a pastel.
Well, you never answered my question, so I'm going back to it. Yeah. So,
I'm sorry.
Okay, so why not? You said you teach your students a clean method. You're using palette knife to mix your colors on your palette. But why aren't you just using a brush to mix your colors? Is it because you don't want some remnant leftover color polluting the color?
Oh, yeah, definitely, because if you use a palette knife and you clean the palette knife off before you touch the paint that you're grabbing to mix into the other color, then you're only getting 2 colors coming together, not remnants of something else. If you're using your brush, you're beating your brush up. And I love my brushes, and I try to be gentle with them. And mixing really beats them down. And so a palette knife can give you that energy to do what you want to do and keep out colors that you don't want in the hue or the whole mixture of the color.
How much are you painting with your palette knife?
I generally block in with my brush, and I thin it, and I work from thin to medium mixture of paint. I'll add linseed into it. And then there'll be areas, especially if I'm under a time constraint, the bus is coming, you got to go. Or if I'm working with students, I'll grab my palette knife and I'd say just whack in the areas. Sometimes, like if you're doing a sunset, it can be a harmony of the brush and the palette knife together. So I'd say it's maybe 40% palette knife, sometimes just 15 or 20. But I do like the palette knife, and the brush is a key, and I'll generally use 3 to 4 brushes that are different sizes incorporated with that.
So palette knife painting is hard. How do you learn? How do you teach yourself to paint with a knife? Because it seems like, watching you have the ability to manipulate the paint and lay that paint down and get the palette knife to do what you want it to do. But that's not easy to do. How do you learn how to do that?
Well, I think it comes down to asking yourself questions, saying, I wonder what would happen if, and being willing to experiment. And so playing, it's very important to play. Perhaps just use a burst of energy and see what you can do with the palette knife. Using the palette knife to mix on the palette makes you user-friendly with the tool that you're going to use as your expressive instrument. And I think the shape and size of the palette knife is very important, and it's personal. I really, truly believe that each person is individual as their fingerprint. And we have different ways of expressing ourselves. And with that in mind, what I'm saying can maybe open a doorway to something that someone else might want to try. But I've discovered all this through a lot of trial and error. It wasn't just something that I woke up and said, I'm going to do this now. there have been a lot of defeats and pieces of paintings that were interesting and some that I was going to throw out, but I didn't. I'm not a fan of scraping things off. I'm a fan of looking at what you did and understanding what you did right and understanding what you did wrong and going ahead and using the materials. I've been very blessed and fortunate to have surfaces and tools that I'm sponsored through different companies that have given me an edge and a speed up to learn things in a bigger learning curve by having really exquisite tools. So the palette knife for your hand, for your personality, is really important. And sometimes you might need to try 3 or 4 palette knives.
So talk a little bit about tools, because that's one of the things that beginners usually get wrong because they don't know any better. But there really is a difference between paints, student grade paints, and of course they don't say student grade typically. They just have a different brand name. So talk about that just a little bit so people can understand, in case they're beginners or in case they haven't experienced this, what those differences might be.
Well, I have this, my mind is pulling and tugging between oil and pastel. So if you'll allow me to flip back and forth between the two of them, I think that's a big part of who I am.
Permission granted.
Okay. So in oils, I think getting a solid foundation of a color palette in something you can afford is the most important thing. But you'll find that some paints are quite more expensive than others. And those, you get bang for buck there. Student grade versus higher end professional quality. That tube of paint that you pay more for should last a lot longer. And you need less paint. So there's more mileage out of it. So in terms of that, you need to get a mentor, someone that can guide you in your decision making. But sometimes it's worth spending something more. And then the other thing is, once you get your foundation in oils, I think it's really exciting to treat yourself to a new tube of paint. Try different brands. Get to understand the consistency of them and find what works for you. That's my oil philosophy there. And pastels, you need a foundation.
Wait,
yes.
Just wait. I'm going to stop and ask you a question. So, are you a color junkie? In other words, if you wander into an art store and you see some kind of a color that you've never seen before, or something that looks fascinating.
How did you know?
Yeah. Well, it takes one to know one, I guess.
You got it. I am.
I
I'm
have
a color junkie. Yep.
I have about 2,000 tubes of paint hanging around, some of which I never use, most of which I never use. But when you do that, doesn't that mess up your whole sense of color harmony in your palette and everything? Because you kind of know, if you've done your color charts and you know your palette and you know that the 8 or 10 colors in your palette can be mixed in all these different ways, the minute you introduce something new, all chaos breaks loose. But yet we still do it. What do you do? How do you deal with that?
You just described the total adventure of art. All chaos breaks loose. You buy a new tube of paint. Oh my, I wonder what would happen if. The doors are open, you become a scientist, and you discover things. And it makes your work more unique to your fingerprint. You have to allow yourself to do that. Now, as far as consistency, a lot of the PleinAir painters have a very limited palette because they're trying to carry lighter weight tools and less paints. But I tend to take smaller amounts of the tubes or the mini tubes so that I can have more choices. That's just the way I think. If I'm teaching a class, I try to teach a limited palette so that they understand how to mix greens. But when you're PleinAir painting, for me, I might have 14 or 15 tubes. Now, it's taken me a long time to get down from a whole lot more from the studio because I realize that's very silly to be straining my energy and hauling that amount when I could put that into painting instead. So I don't know if that answers your question in the oils. Does that?
Probably not, but that's okay. No, of course you did. I think that's something that over time, and I don't know if it's an age thing, but over time it's like trying to get the weight out. I use lead paint, so it's really heavy. And not all my paint is lead, of course, but my whites are. And those tubes weigh about 900 pounds. So, when you're hiking up a mountain, you're carrying 50 tubes of paint in your backpack. That's tough. So,
Well,
when you go out and you do hiking and so on, do you limit your palette, or do you still stick to the 15 tubes?
Well, I'm really excited to say that I have graduated from my half-box French easel to a lighter weight PleinAir easel. You'll be really shocked. I saw you roll your eyes when you looked at me and at the Adirondacks, and you said, "Oh, you still have a French easel."
Oh, I did not.
Yes, you did. Kind of, sort of.
Well,
But anyway,
I love them. I started out with one of those, and they're very romantic because of Monet and all those people. And there's certainly nothing wrong with it. I just, in my life, not that this is about me, but it's about weight, right? So anything I can do to reduce weight. I mean, if I could figure out how to make an easel out of cardboard, I probably would, because it would be less weight.
Well, I just did a dry run the last 3 days teaching a class, and I think I found a much more economizing weight amount. And I was able to lay the paint out, and I'll keep bumping up that notch there to figure out my limit of what I need. But I think it's a good day tripper. So I can limit my palette, but I'm never going to limit it down to 8. I'm always going to need a dozen.
Yeah.
I just have to have accent colors. I love purples. I love fuchsias. I kick it up a notch, and I limit my yellows and blues. But then I have accent colors that secret recipes, I call them. My students will always say, "And what's that color? What's that color?"
Yeah. Well, that's the fun thing about being a student, is you want to copy everything that the teacher does. So your harmony, though, in your painting, so you're looking at your palette and you're trying to determine how this is going to look next to something. But are you consciously laying things down in a harmonious fashion? In other words, a lot of people will say cool next to a warm. Are you doing that, or is it just kind of intuitive?
I'm an intuitive painter. I'll often start on a foundation of color in my oils, and that totally connects to my past history of working in pastels exclusively for 15 years prior to that, and oils before that. And years ago, back in the mid-'80s, when I was painting in pastels, there was Canson colored paper and just a few brands of pastels. But as soon as you would take this gorgeous color, let's say the Sennelier, and just roll it on to the paper, it just ignited with a visual response that created this excitement in your brain for me. And if I was working in the studio, there'd be music. If I was out in the landscape, I would be purely gut responding to what I was seeing, usually painting by myself and connecting to the environment, listening to the music of the woods, air, the animals, the water. I mean, to me, that's the music of the environment when I hear those sounds. And that affects my color choices. It really does.
I remember a story of you connecting to the environment, maybe a little bit too much. If I remember correctly, it was in San Diego. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Do you want to share that story, or should I embarrass you?
Well, which story are you talking about? The one where I was left behind?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was a really exciting day because San Diego, again, was another coastline that, for me, ignited my interest in adventure and the idea of my father taking me to a new place and really seeing it as an artist. But, of course, I was faculty, and I was carpooling with other faculty, and this was was it Point Loma?
Point Lomos.
Yes, Point Lomos. And we had to be out by 5 o'clock. And I missed my ride because I was so focused on really connecting with the artists as faculty. We were all lined up on this hillside looking down at the crashing waves, and the light was sparkling on the water, and the wind was blowing, and it just was so igniting to your energy. And to my left, there were 20 artists, and to my right, there were 20, and there were some down below. And I decided, this is the day. It's the last day, our free day. I'm going to paint. And I had a great surface to work on, very lightweight cloth and linen with a multimedia. I was testing something just wonderful with my colors. But the key was I had to pay attention to my students. So about 3/4 through the day, I had a little thought in my head, I wonder when my ride's coming. Oh, it's later. And the wind picked up and easels were flying over. And I through the entire day, I kept having this kind of thought in my head about expect the unexpected, always be prepared. But of course, I wanted to paint. And when the easels started going over with the newbies that were there, I thought, well, no one seems too distressed. Give them a few minutes to figure it out. But a good Boy Scout would go around and help them out. So I, expect the unexpected, always be prepared. I thought, well, now, once they wrestled with this, I need to help them figure out how to weight their easels. And I successfully did that. I had a lot of great interactions, returned to my painting, and was quite pleased with my painting. And as the day went along, I packed everything up, and somehow I missed my ride.
And everybody was gone.
Everybody was gone. I remember you saying, are you sure you don't need a ride? And I said, no, I got a ride coming. But it was my fault. A little snafu and a hiccup in the brain of the memories. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at my French easel, and I'm realizing that the cars are going off in the distance. And So I walked out of the park. I ended up getting hitchhiked with my little faculty flag and my French easel, and got a ride with some park rangers, and ended up at dinner with you by some magical reason. I don't know how this all happened, but someone invited me to go to dinner. They could pick me up because I couldn't get an Uber. I was going to the wrong place, and voila, I ended up sitting across from you at dinner. How did that even happen?
Maybe there were far too many margaritas going on that night, if I remember correctly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it was the essence of the story for me was that we can't get too deeply into our plein air painting, that we have to really think about our safety, because I couldn't walk through the fields. It was a long way to go. There was no cell phone connection, which has been a reality in many of the places that I painted with you. We don't have connection for cell phone, and so therefore safety first is a really big part of plein air painting.
Well, the most trying times, the most difficult moments, oftentimes make for the best memories. They do. They're not necessarily very happy at the moment. When your easel blows over, or you have to hike out of somewhere, you get poison ivy or whatever. But
it was an exhilarating day, and I did get poison ivy from the park rangers.
Of course you did.
Because I had capris on. But hey, that's outdoor girl has her little sensitivities, and long pants are a really good idea when you're plein air painting.
So you recently took a trip to France. Tell me about that, because that was kind of an interesting story.
Well, it was. I have to say, I'd say that was pretty much a dream come true, because the last time I was in France, I was 16, and it was something my parents wanted me to experience with my high school class, and it coincidentally fell on my 16th birthday on Easter Sunday, standing in Notre Dame Cathedral. So, fast forward all these years, and this year I turned 61, and it hit me on my birthday, like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be going to France. So I had this terrific opportunity that, again, was inspired by a happening at the San Diego Plein Air Convention, because I got there early. It was my presentation as pastel faculty that year, and I acclimated, which is good. Time zone change, acclimation is good. But I met through the backpack inserts that you put in for everyone that attends the plein air conventions. There was something in there that talked about looking for faculty and put this in for a drawing, and it happened to be cerulean blue trips. And when I went on down there, I really connected with Nan Dawkins, And that night she sent me this very organized response to how she would work with someone that would be a teacher with her. And my little mind light bulb went on. The next day when I walked into the art expo and crossed the area from one booth to another and approached the Sinelli one, and Pierre Guidetti goes, "Oh, Suzanne, tell me about your Hamo artist retreat." And I just looked at him and smiled, because I've been doing that for about 20 years. And he'd obviously seen that I was having good things happening. And he said, "Oh, I have a dream, Suzanne. I have a dream at my home in Brittany and Kerema that I would have a school there. And I want to do retreats there." So I connected Cerulean Blue Trips with Sinelli and Pierre. And this was just such a lovely, pristine place. There were 14 people that attended, wonderful food made, and the home, a family heritage home along the coast, the northern coast of France.
A lot of famous
Very
painters
cool.
painted in Brittany.
Yes, yes, and I can see why. There's no tourist attractions. It's just peaceful and lovely and pristine. The sand dunes were up high and the sea down crashing. You could walk on the sand dunes, but there was a lot of history because there were German bunkers there. One of them, we took a little shelter in it during a storm. Just opportunities to make a place that has a lot of history be really joyful and explorative. We had products that we were working in. I taught 4 different mediums, and the products were provided, and it was an intense adventure with a glorious memory that I'm still processing because I just came back a couple of weeks ago.
Cool.
Yeah.
So talk to me about your philosophies on painting or life. Any thoughts?
Okay. Well, I think the heart of the artist is very important, not only for me, but the people that I work with. I see myself as a very sensitive person. I can see and feel things beyond what's right there. People ask me, where do you see that color? What's a feeling of color? So my philosophy is allowing yourself to be free enough to see the things that you dream. And in teaching, I find it really important to connect with people. Join in my experiences that I've had, my emotional, physical, all that knowledge that's all tied up within a kind of a circle of life. And realize that I have to connect with them and inspire them. So knowing that they're very individual, that they see things differently, being respectful to everyone that I connect with. So my philosophy is to connect people also to my art, that I create feelings within my paintings. I work from very miniature things that are PleinAir to very large studio pieces. And those are well thought out and based on experiences and emotions, often influenced by music in the studio and color, palette knife, texture, but wonderful atmospheric layers. I have so much to do, so much that I have in my head that I just can't wait to do. Yeah.
So you do a lot of teaching, and you talked about inspiring people. What is in your mind, the proper process for learning? So you got a lot of people who are listening to this who probably have never painted before, maybe never picked up a paintbrush. They're intimidated by it. They don't believe they can do it. They think, I really wish I could do this, but I just don't have any natural inborn talent. And there seems to be this mistaken belief that art is about having, people are born with talent. You have to go to school to become a surgeon. You have to learn the scales to become a pianist or a guitar player. But for some reason, there's this mistaken belief that people who have talent as artists are born with talent, and I'm sure some are. But how do you, what do you tell people when you say, okay, here's the path that you might want to consider taking?
Well, for me as a teacher, it's very important to have a brief conversation with them on a phone before class, if at all possible. But when I meet the person face to face, I've connected that. I have a little bit about them. And for me, I think someone who's coming new to art, the most important thing is creating an atmosphere or an environment that is open and welcoming wherever they are, whatever state and level they're at. And having heard what their dreams are or where they are, you see them and react to them. And so creating this atmosphere of no fear, no failure, that they have an atmosphere where they can try things, an explorative one. I'll often use the terminology that pretend you're a scientist and this is an experiment. I also have a philosophy on just facing things. If you ask yourself a question, I wonder what would happen if, you have to try it. What you do is not a mistake. It's a step towards learning, and oftentimes it can just totally bust open this whole territory in your learning process. So I like to reach deep in my students and pull out who they are and not stamp them with who I am, but influence them with my demonstrations are like kickstart demos. Rather than a long, thorough demo, I'll do something that is visually inspirational, that will connect to a wide range of students. Color is often the root of it, and it's often done quickly, which breaks down the walls of perfection and opens up doorways of exploration. That's what I think.
Thank you for that.
Really?
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
So before we part, do you have any final thoughts for audience about painting? Anything that you want to, any wisdom? I didn't let you finish your pastel piece, so I kind of stepped on you before that. So that might be one of them. And then anything else that you feel a burning desire to share?
Okay. Well, as a parent who raised 3 kids, pastels played a really huge part in my learning process. The other connection beyond college and my degree, which wasn't really a great tool for getting where I am now, it just was a stepping stone, were all the magazines that I bought and looked at. And by the way, currently the PleinAir magazine is doing these breakouts with the stages of development of paintings. Great visuals for someone to learn. And that's what I used as a tool all through the 80s and 90s and through the 2000s. And that really connects to where I am now, that it's an ongoing process of learning, that the pastels that I did while I was raising my family, even though I might not have had a lot of time, I made the time. I actually scheduled the time. I'm a very good organizer of giving myself the privilege of being an artist. I felt that it was always so important for me to fill my cup of sustenance in art and creating. The whole process of making something, especially in pastels, touching pastel to paper, was a serotonin booster. It's been proven, art and color does that. And so it was a natural high, even if it was only 15 minutes when my kids were little. And giving myself that time to get a sitter and go out and paint gave me the energy to really focus on being a good parent. My kids are very independent and happy and thriving. And now it's a time for me to really focus on where I want to go. And the journey's kind of come full circle. All the things that were part of me, like my 2 hands put together like a wagon wheel, are connected now on the outside. All those things that were me that seemed so separate and different and wasted are real, and they're all connected into where I'm going now and are making me be kind of good teacher I am that I hear, and the dreamer that I am as a painter. Everything that happened with my children, caring for my dad, trials, and all those things that were very, very difficult, that painful and sad. It made me a stronger person, to be more empathetic. I think empathy is really important for an artist. Don't take yourself too seriously, but also believe in yourself and reach high. I've had this whole big vision the last a couple of years, I guess, of being on a high dive over the quarry. My brother's, younger, saying, "You jump first." But I feel like I've gathered all the information, and I've been trying to figure out where am I going to go now with my art and my teaching and galleries that I dream of being in, running with all the changes that are happening in the world, and believing that I can make a difference, that I can bring joy and inspiration to people, get them out in nature, heal people with nature and painting, and lift their spirits, give them belief in themselves, and totally connect to something seemingly so trivial, hanging exhibits, bringing students together, mentoring to teens. It's just like a big spiral of excitement of things that I want to do. It's just coming to a culmination of, I guess, another high dive. Maybe this time over a really nice little pond instead of a quarry. What do you think?
Yeah, I like it. Well, it sounds
something
to me
a little
like
safer.
Sounds to me like you've been a bit of a risk taker, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Well, sometimes things come at you that you don't even plan in, and you're facing things that you never anticipated, and you just reach really deep to be strong. So, hey, I think art is going to change a lot of things in this world. There's a lot of unrest, and bringing people into nature to plein air paint, and even putting color on a piece of paper in a studio. I love working with young people. I did a 6th to 12th grade outdoor plein air class the last 7-8 years at a marsh area, and bringing them into nature, seeing a teen put their cell phone down and just totally get engaged in color and paint, and the peace that just surrounds their aura when they're done. Art's really good.
Yeah, that's why we want to teach more people to paint. Susan, thank you so much for being a part of the PleinAir podcast today. You're an inspiration to us all. You're a fabulous painter. I'm honored to know you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And this has been wonderful to share my ideas and to connect with you, Eric. And I wish you good. Take care.
This has been the PleinAir podcast with PleinAir Magazine's Eric Rhodes. You can help spread the word about plein air painting by sharing this podcast with your friends. And you can leave a review or subscribe on iTunes so it comes to you every week. And you can even reach Eric by email, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Be sure to pick up our free ebook, 240 plein air painting tips by some of America's top painters. It's free at pleinairtips.com. Tune in next week for more great interviews. Thanks for listening.
Thanks again to Susan Nicholas Gephardt. She's a fabulous person, great painter, very sensitive, fun to be around. You'd like her a lot. You should come out and meet her. I'm sure she'll be at the convention.
This is the Marketing Minute with Eric Rhodes, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Make More Money Selling Your Art, Proven Techniques to Turn Your Passion into Profit.
In the Marketing Minute, I try to answer your marketing questions, which you can email me, eric@pleinairmagazine.com. Here's a question from Lydia Velarde of Poway, California. Lydia says, I like urban sketching, watercolor, and sometimes oil. Do you think I should concentrate on one medium to get excellent at one style and one medium? I think if you're asking the question, you've already answered the question. First off, I can tell you that I love to dabble in a lot of things. I dabble in watercolor, I do oil, I play with pastels, I'm doing a little bit of sculpture. It's fun. I also do a lot of drawing. But in terms of what I'm presenting to my gallery, if this is about selling artwork, I'm trying to establish myself as an oil painter, and that's what I want to be known as. And so I think that excellence in whatever you're doing comes first. So master something, get really good at it. It doesn't happen overnight. So even though you may want to continue to do urban sketching or watercolor or oil, pick one of those things that is your thing that you become known for, because you don't necessarily want to confuse the audience. Now, you will have artists like Susan Nicholas Gephart, who just mentioned that she does pastel, she does oil, and she does them both really, really well. And so she's able to kind of walk that line, but you just got to be ready to know what you're capable of. You also want to make sure that you kind of get known for whatever it is you want to get known for. You know, that could be portraits, it could be landscapes, it could be a certain type of landscape. But you don't want to confuse the market too much when you're first getting established. As you're more established, it's probably okay a little bit. But I remember a story about a lady who contacted me, and she was advertising her portraits, but when you went to her website, all you saw were her landscapes, and you had to really dig deep for the portraits. It just didn't make a lot of sense. So you want to just make sure that you're congruent. A lot of artists are doing multiple mediums. Some of them are selling well in both or three, but pick something that you can be really good at and get known for. Collectors and galleries look for excellence and consistency, and you don't want to confuse them. All right? Okay. Next question is from Robert Ward of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. How do you develop a small town's market for art? Small town, his town has 35,000 people. Well, a lot of people don't know about art. Art is an education process. There are a lot of people that I've helped turn into collectors just by exposing them to art. And a lot of people who pick up art magazines have become art collectors. So I think the idea is just get your art out there, wherever you possibly can. There are people who are going to see it, they're going to like it. And, so it might be an exhibit at a local gallery. It might be an exhibit in a local restaurant. I think the idea is you want to get people thinking about art. If you want to develop a market for art, then you probably want it to be more than you. You want to develop a little artist community, maybe figure out how to put together a bunch of artists and get your own little gallery together so that you can put your work out there together, make sure the quality is high, and then look for options for local art shows, art in the libraries or public institutions to showcase these artists, because the more, even though it seems counterintuitive, the more people are interested in art, they're not all going to love your art, but they might love somebody else's art. But you want to get people thinking about and learning about and growing and developing art. And of course, anything you can do to work with the local community. I spend my summers near Saranac Lake, New York, and they've done a great job in the arts community by developing a little local gallery. They've developed a little community arts program. They're doing a lot of PleinAir events once a year and things like that. And so this is a way that you develop the community, get the community thinking about the arts, turn your area into an art destination. So people who maybe, I don't know how far you are from another bigger city, but maybe people will come to Cape Girardeau from Chicago to see the art there, and so look for ways to work with the merchant associations, local chamber of commerce, do events that can be showcased in an effective way to develop your market. All right, does that help? Also, there are a lot of people, even in a town of 35,000 people, who can comfortably afford to buy art. And so get to know the people, local business owners, local doctors. Maybe you put your art in the hospitals. There's a lot of things, a lot of ways to establish yourself and get out there. Social media gives you the opportunity to target locally. And you could also, if there are little local magazines, local community magazine or something, you can get your art in there and start getting people thinking about it. They got to see it. They got to think about it before they buy it. Today's podcast was brought to you by the PleinAir Salon bi-monthly art competition, which offers $27,000 in annual cash prizes, including a $15,000 grand prize, and the cover of PleinAir magazine. Bi-monthly winners featured in PleinAir Today newsletter. And so you should sign up for that. Check it out. It's pleinairsalon.com. And it's also sponsored by the PleinAir Convention, coming to San Francisco and Wine Country in April. It's probably going to be the biggest and best yet. First off, there's a lot of great artists we're pulling in from the area, but secondly, The area's got a lot of artists. It's going to really be a popular destination. San Francisco is the most popular tourism destination in America. Everybody's been asking us to do a convention in San Francisco. It was, quite frankly, we weren't doing it because it was going to be too expensive to do it there, but we got a bargain with a hotel for one time and one time only. And so it's a great opportunity, a good time to come. You're going to have a ball. San Francisco's going to be a ball. 80 top master artists coming in. A lot of them haven't been announced yet, and we're going to be painting together. We're going to be on-stage demos and watercolor and oil, pastel, acrylic, social, all kinds of things. We're doing art marketing, mornings, just lots of stuff. So it's a great value and a great time. You can learn more at pleinairconvention.com. Also, if you've not seen my blog where I talk about life and art and stuff, check it out. It's called Sunday Coffee, and it's up to 100,000 readers. You can find it at coffeewitheric.com, and I think we're up to almost 500,000 listeners on this podcast. It's just hard to believe. I mean, I'm so honored that people are interested in plein air painting. I think that's so cool. Anyway, this is cool. It's fun. It's fun to do this. Let's do it again, like next week. I'll see you then. My name is Eric Rhodes. I'm a publisher of Plein Air magazine, and I hope you will start painting if you haven't done it yet. It's a big world out there. You need to go paint it. We'll see you.